3 women vanished on Charles Bridge at night. 2 small marks on their necks. And the man without a shadow? I painted him.
In the year 1780, 3 young women disappeared in Prague. All 3 were servants, daughters of craftsmen and shopkeepers from Malá Strana. Nobody searched for them. In the Prague of Emperor Joseph II, a missing servant was not worth a single line in the city records. But someone noticed. Someone who spent their nights on the streets while others slept. Someone who saw more than the light revealed. This is her story. On Malá Strana, in a narrow lane beneath Prague Castle, stood the house of the clockmaker František Novotný, a house that smelled of oil and brass, where the ticking of dozens of clocks created an endless symphony of time. František Novotný was a widower, an honest craftsman who repaired clocks for the nobles of Hradčany and counted every coin. He had 2 apprentices, a workshop, and a daughter he did not know what to do with. Klara Novotná was 22 years old. She was unmarried, which in 18th century Prague meant that people talked. Her father wanted her to marry the son of a merchant from Nové Město. A respectable match, he said. Good business. Klara told him she was not ready. What she meant was that she was ready for something else entirely. Every night after František fell asleep to the sound of his clocks, Klara climbed the stairs to the attic. There, behind old trunks and curtains, she had her studio. Women in Prague of 1780 were not permitted to join the Artists' Guild. The guild had been open only to men for as long as anyone could remember. No woman could take on apprentices, display work publicly, or accept commissions under her own name. And so Klara sold her paintings under the name Karel Dvořák, a painter who never existed. On her walks to the Old Town Square, Klara saw the changes arriving. Emperor Joseph II had just become sole ruler after his mother's death, and already the city was bracing. Guards nailed new edicts to church doors. On Strahov, monks stood in clusters, speaking in low voices about dissolution orders they could not believe were real. The imperial parks on Hradčany, closed for generations, had been opened to anyone who wished to enter. Klara had walked through one the week before, still half expecting to be turned away at the gate. And in the Jewish quarter, Samuel told her the whispers were growing louder. Freedoms the community had not known in centuries, coming soon, perhaps by year's end. None of it had fully arrived yet. Prague was holding its breath, but Klara could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet on streets she had walked since childhood. Her landscape sold well on the Old Town Square, views of the Vltava, portraits of saints for churches. Nothing extraordinary, her intermediary would say. Samuel was an old Jewish merchant who knew that Karel Dvořák was really Klara and had never told a soul. But there was something about her paintings that buyers could not name. Klara painted shadows differently. Her shadows had depth, weight, volume, as if they belonged to someone standing just beyond the edge of the canvas, someone you could feel but could not see. Once, a buyer brought a painting back, a landscape of the Strahov monastery at dusk. He said the shadows moved when he was not looking directly at them. He said the painting made his room feel occupied. Samuel refunded the money and said nothing to Klara. He did not want to frighten her. He was also not entirely sure the man was wrong. One October morning, Samuel brought unexpected news. Someone had bought her latest painting, a nocturnal view of the Vltava from Charles Bridge, and they had paid triple the usual price. Samuel handed her a note. 5 words, written in the kind of elegant script Klara had only seen in books. Come to the Chernin Palace. Who sent it? Klara asked. Samuel shook his head. A servant. No name, just the money and the note. Klara turned the paper over in her hands. The ink was very black. The handwriting was precise in a way that suggested someone who had been writing for much longer than a single lifetime. The Czernin Palace, the largest Baroque palace in Prague. 30 Corinthian columns, a facade 150 meters long. Construction had begun in 1669 and lasted longer than an entire generation. The Czernin family was one of the most powerful noble houses in Bohemia. Their palace stood on Hradčany as a silent demonstration of power that had survived the Battle of White Mountain, the 30 Years' War, the plague, and the Prussian bombardment of 1757. Klara had walked past it her entire life. She had never imagined she would step inside. She arrived at dusk. A servant led her through corridors that smelled of wax and old wood. On the walls hung portraits of generations of Czernins: Humprecht Jan, Hezman Jakub, František Josef. Faces from distant centuries, captured in oil on canvas, gazed down at the clockmaker's daughter as she tried not to stumble on the polished floor. The servant stopped at a doorway and disappeared. Klara stood alone in a gallery lit by candelabras that cast long, trembling shadows on the marble floor. Her own shadow stretched behind her, dark and solid like a loyal companion. At the end of the gallery, a man was waiting. He was not what she expected. He was young, perhaps 30. Dark hair swept back, and his eyes that did not seem to receive the candlelight, but to absorb it, like dark water swallowing a thrown stone. He introduced himself simply as Viktor. No title, no surname. He spoke about her painting in a way that unsettled her. He described the exact bend of the river she had painted, the way the moonlight fractured on the surface, as if he had been standing beside her while she worked, as if he had stood on that spot by the riverbank for a very long time. "You painted the Vltava the way it looks when there is no one watching," he said. "Most painters paint the river as a backdrop. You painted it as if it were the subject, as if the river had a countenance of its own." They walked through the gallery together. Viktor knew the story behind every portrait, not like a guide reciting a memorized text, like someone who had known those people personally. He paused before a portrait of Hezman Jakub Czernin and said, "He was kinder than his face suggests. He laughed more than this painter captured." It was a strange thing to say about a man who had been dead for nearly a century. Then Klara stopped. One portrait, oil on canvas, dated 1680. A man in a dark coat, the same jaw, the same impossible eyes. On the brass plaque beneath the frame, Victor von Thurn, 1649 to 1713. She looked at the man beside her, then back at the portrait, then at him again. The resemblance was not approximate. It was exact. Not a family likeness passed down through generations. The same person, the same lines around the mouth, the same way the eyes seemed to pull light into them rather than reflect it. "A distant relative," Victor said. He did not smile. In that moment, Klara should have left. Any sensible person would have left. But Klara had spent her entire life painting things that others could not see. Shadows that belonged to no one. Light that came from nowhere. A river that had a face. And here stood a man whose face hung on a portrait 100 years old. Klara's heart was beating hard, but her hands were steady. They were always steady. It was the one thing painting had taught her. When the world becomes strange, hold the brush tighter. Victor asked her to paint Charles Bridge at night. "I want to see Prague the way no one else sees it," he said, "and you paint what others overlook." And so, on a cold November evening, Klara set up her easel on the oldest bridge in Prague. Charles Bridge, founded in 1357 by Charles IV, 16 arches across the Vltava. 30 statues of saints along the balustrade, most added in the early 1700s, their sandstone faces darkened by decades of rain and soot. At night, in the fog, the bridge looked different. The statues seemed closer, as if they leaned in to listen. The faces of the saints, carved from sandstone, wore expressions in the darkness that were invisible by day. St. John of Nepomuk, thrown from this very bridge in 1393, looked down at the water with an expression that was not saintly resignation, but something closer to anticipation. Klara painted for an hour. Viktor stood nearby, watching the river. Occasionally he glanced at her canvas. Fog rose from the Vltava like the breath of a sleeping animal. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that Prague does not have even at night. She was aware of him in a way she had never been aware of anyone, not as a threat, as a presence. The air around him was different, cooler, denser, as if he displaced more space than his body should occupy. When the breeze shifted, she caught his scent, old paper, stone, and something underneath that she could not name. Something that was not cologne or soap or any human thing, something that smelled like centuries. Then Klara noticed something. Her lantern cast a warm circle of light on the ancient stones. Her own shadow stretched behind her, long and thin on the cobblestones that remembered the coronation processions of Bohemian kings. But where Viktor stood, nothing. The light passed through the space where his shadow should have been as if he were made of pure glass, as if no one stood there, as if he were only a thought that had forgotten to disappear. She stared at the empty cobblestones for a long time. She checked the lantern. She moved it. Her shadow responded. His did not appear. She remembered the 3 women, all last seen on this bridge, all vanished before dawn. She should have run. Every reasonable thought told her to pack her brushes and leave. But Klara had spent her whole life painting shadows, and here stood a man who had none. "You have no shadow," she said. It was not a question. Viktor slowly turned from the river. For the first time all evening, he looked directly into her eyes, and Klara saw something she did not expect. Not a threat, not indifference, exhaustion. Deep, centuries-old exhaustion of a person who had long since stopped counting the years. "You see more than you should," he said quietly. "That is why I paint, Mr. Viktor, because I see more than I should." They stood on the bridge that had borne the weight of 6 centuries, and between them hung a moment when a person decides. Run or stay. Close your eyes or keep looking. Viktor looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not the weariness. Something beneath it. Fear. He took a half step toward her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. Not the cold of the November air. Something older, deeper. The cold of a body that had not been warm since the 17th century. For 1 second, Klara thought he was going to touch her face. His hand rose slightly, then it stopped. His fingers curled inward as if catching themselves. "You should go home, Klara." It was the first time he used her name, the first time his voice carried something that sounded like fear. Not of her. For her. He turned and walked into the fog. Within 3 steps, he was gone. Not walking away. Simply no longer there. As if the mist had swallowed him, or as if he had never been anything more than a trick of the lamplight. Klara stood on the bridge, shaking. Not from cold, from the place on her cheek where his hand had almost been. Klara did not sleep that night. She returned to her studio beneath the roof of the clockmaker's house and painted. For the first time in her life, she painted in the dark. For the first time, she did not need light to see. She painted the man without a shadow, standing on the bridge in the fog. She painted the Vltava as if it remembered every face that had ever been reflected in it. She painted the statues of saints leaning in to listen to a story older than they were. Her brush moved with a certainty she had never felt before, as if the painting already existed and she was simply uncovering it, the way a sculptor reveals a figure already present in the stone. She did not choose the colors. They chose her. The cadmium yellow of the lantern, the Prussian blue of the fog, the raw umber of the bridge. And for Viktor, ivory black mixed with something she could not name, a darkness that seemed to come from the paint itself rather than the palette. When the first rays of sunlight pierced the attic window and touched the wet canvas, Klara stepped back and looked at her painting. It was the best she had ever made, and she knew she would never sell it under the name Karel de Vojak. This painting belonged only to her. Below her feet, in the workshop, her father's clocks began their morning symphony, ticking, chiming, counting the hours of a new day. And on one of those clocks, Klara noticed for the first time the hands cast a shadow across the dial. Everything in her father's workshop cast a shadow. Everything in the world cast a shadow. Everything except the man she could not stop painting. Morning. Samuel came with news. On Charles Bridge they had found a fourth girl. Alive. She was terrified, frozen, and remembered nothing from the previous night. Only 2 small marks on her neck, and one word, which she repeated again and again, like a prayer or a warning. Run. The girl's name was Anishka. She was 16, a servant from a bakery on Nerudova Street. She had been found just before dawn, sitting against the base of the statue of Saint Luitgard, shivering, her eyes empty of everything except a terror she could not explain. Klara listened to Samuel describe the girl, and she thought of Viktor standing on the bridge in the place where Anishka had been found, standing where all 4 women had last been seen, standing without a shadow in the lamplight. Klara looked at her painting again. In the morning light, something was different, something she had not intended. She had painted Viktor on the bridge, alone in the fog turned toward the river, exactly as she had seen him. But behind him, where his shadow should have been, stood another figure. She had not seen anyone else on the bridge that night. She had not painted this deliberately. Her hand had done it on its own, the way it always did when she painted the things others could not see, the shadows with depth, the light from nowhere, the face beneath the face. The figure had Viktor's face, the same jaw, the same dark hair. But the eyes were wrong. Where Viktor's eyes absorbed light with weariness, these eyes drank it with hunger. And the mouth. The mouth had something on it that caught the morning light. Klara leaned closer. Blood. 2 thin lines of blood running from the corners of the lips. She stood in her attic studio, surrounded by the ticking of her father's clocks below, and stared at the 2 figures on the canvas. One weary, one hungry, both wearing the same face. And as she stared, something happened that had never happened with any of her paintings before. The candle on her work table, 3 feet from the canvas, guttered and went out, as if something in the painting had drawn the air from the room. Klara relit the candle with shaking hands. The painting stared back, unchanged. 2 figures on a bridge. The clocks ticked. The sun rose over Prague. And somewhere on Malá Strana, a girl named Anishka whispered, "Run," to anyone who would listen. Klara did not run. She picked up a clean brush. She looked at the painting, then at the blank canvas beside it. She wondered what she would see the next time she painted him. Whether the second figure would be closer. Whether its eyes would be open, wider. Whether the blood would still be wet. She was afraid, but fear had never stopped her brush before.
If this story stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe to Immortal Hearts. Then tell me in the comments, what captivated you most, and where and in which year should the next story unfold?